Start, and my role here is simply to get people up here to the podium, and I won't make a lot of remarks because those folks will cover the things that are going on. We really appreciate you being here, and our first speaker is our Mayor, Jeff Mason.
As like Bill said, I'm not going to say a lot because this day is not about me or anything I've got to say. Bad thing about being outside is the trucks come by. But we do want to welcome you to Smith County and Carthage, Tennessee. I am Jeff Mason, the Smith County Mayor, and it is my honor and privilege to be here today for this event. We are excited to be able to do this and look forward to what it means for our county and what Mr. DeFord did for us, and we're just glad to be here. And so just wanted to say welcome and thank you for being here.
Mr. Paul Kingsley with the Country Music Hall of Fame.
It's great to be with y'all today. This is a wonderful celebration of music history, Smith County history, and as a representative of the Country Music Hall of Fame, I can say we are very proud that DeFord Bailey has been a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame since 2005. Very deserved honor for that wonderful musician. I'm sure y'all have heard some of the recordings that have been playing here of DeFord's music, made a few decades ago by David Morton, DeFord Bailey's friend and biographer, who will be speaking with us in a little bit. DeFord Bailey didn't make many commercial recordings, but they are immortal recordings. He was one of the first country music artists to record for the RCA Company in 1928 in Nashville. And those recordings, as I say, are immortal. It's a great honor to be here to see this unveiling of this wonderful marker indicating DeFord Bailey's origins here in Smith County, and I'm really proud to be here and so happy to be with you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kingsbury. And now we're going to invite our city mayor, Miss Sarah Marie Smith, to come up. She has some folks that she's going to introduce, and I'll just turn it over to Mayor Smith.
Carthage is sometimes, oh, sorry. All right, I see why now that it's here. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you again, ladies. These are the two daughters of Mr. DeFord Bailey, Miss Christine Bailey Craig. Would you raise your hand, please? Christine? Thank you. And Desorel Bailey Thomas. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I believe, Miss Craig, you came in from Chicago, is that right? And you're from Nashville. We're so pleased to have you here today. Now, we do have two grandchildren, I think two. Would you please stand and introduce yourselves? Carlos DeFord Bailey, okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining. Let's give them a big hand for coming, and thank you for this heritage and legacy that he left here. Among how many grandchildren altogether, I'm told? 52 grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's fantastic. Thank you. Mr. Kingsbury, we've already spoken with, and we appreciate it.
I'm running around taking photos.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. The other gentleman I'm really pleased to introduce today is someone that just recently met. Yeah. I'll just try to get back. Mr. David Morton, who flew here from Reno, Nevada. He was a dear friend of Mr. Bailey's. The last 10 years of his life, they were really close friends. In fact, I understand Mr. Bailey called you his manager. Is that correct? He wrote the book called DeFord Bailey, A Black Star in Early Country Music. It's the biography he was authorized by Mr. Bailey to write. We're so pleased for you to come and talk to us a little bit from your book about his roots here in Smith County. So help me introduce Mr. Morton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll warn you, my wife says don't get David talking about DeFord Bailey because you can't shut him up. I won't do that to you, but I did have the distinct honor and pleasure to meet DeFord Bailey back in 1973. At that time, I was a graduate student at Vanderbilt working on a PhD in history, but I'd run out of money. So I took what I thought would be a temporary job with a housing authority, and in that role with the housing authority, I ended up doing a newsletter for public housing and urban renewal residents. And an elderly white lady told me, she said, "Dave, you should do a story about DeFord Bailey." I said, "Who is DeFord Bailey?" I had no idea. She said, "Well, he was a big star on the Grand Ole Opry years ago, and he lives over in your high-rise in Edgehill." And I said, "But almost everybody over there is black." She said, "Yeah, he was a black star on the Grand Ole Opry back in the early 20s or the 20s and 30s. So boy, that was intriguing. I thought, well, I need to meet this guy. And I happened to go down to Alabama to visit my parents that weekend. And I told my dad that I was going to be meeting with a black star who had played the harmonica in the Grand Ole Opry. He looked up, he said, "DeFord Bailey? He's still alive?" My dad had grown up listening to him every Saturday night on the Opry. He couldn't believe that DeFord Bailey was someone that he could possibly meet. So with that encouragement, and then when I met Mr. Bailey, we hit it off for a variety of reasons. He was at a very low point in his life. He was living in the high-rise. His hearing had gotten really, really bad. He didn't know what to do about it, and he just assumed that was part of growing old. And, you know, he pretty much become a recluse, really, in his apartment. After meeting him and hearing some of his story and with my dad's encouragement, the more I checked, I said, "God, we got to do something." And I sent him to a speech and hearing clinic. Found out the guy had a wax buildup in his ears that had just ruined his ability to hear. Now, for a musician who can't hear, I mean, the worst of all worlds. So we took care of his problem, got him a hearing aid, although he said he really didn't need it once he had that wax out. And in fact, he told me, he said, "I could hear a fly cough with a whooping cough on it." And that's the way he talked. He was very down to earth. He had minimal education. He said he just learned enough to write his name, and he said try to keep up with his money. So he had very little education formally, but he picked up so much around him, and a lot of that came from Smith County. Now, I made some copies that, if any of you would like, I copied a chapter out of the book that I wrote for him. This is my book, but it's his book. Every time I talked to him the last several years of his life, he said, "How's that book coming?" And he wanted an update on it. Because, I didn't just do this, I did it for him. He wanted the world to know the truth, as he said. "You tell the truth about this old black man." He wanted people to know who he was, what he was, and how he viewed things. That some white people had written about him thinking maybe he didn't like white people. Well, that in any way they're true. he just wanted to be treated the same. And again, an incredible story. But before I get too carried away, let me just read you one paragraph out of the book on Smith County. Because since we're here in Smith County, I think it's just so appropriate that we tell you a little about his growing up here and the ties to Smith County. Okay, here we go. D. Ford heard music in everything, as well, not only the fiddle music of his grandfather, and by the way, he said his grandfather was a champion fiddler in Smith County. So again, another direct tie to Smith County. The fiddle music of his grandfather, the harps of his uncle, and the guitar of his mother. Even as a boy, he tried to duplicate the sounds he heard around the farm. I caught all that, he said. Sheep, cow, chicken, dog. They got music on them. All of them. You can get a heavy bass from a cow. He would lie in his bed and hear the sounds of dogs howling, of wild geese honking as they flew overhead, the wind as it blew through the cracks in the wall, the rumble of a distant train. I'm just like a microphone, he said. I pick up everything I hear around me. In many ways, the Smith County days formed a rich apprenticeship, and though he was to spend only the first 9 years of his life here, D. Ford would carry with him many of the tunes he learned, and even the limitations, the limitations he learned would find a place in his later music. He meant it when he summed up his life there by saying, all these things was happiness back then. So that's just the last part of the second chapter of the book I wrote for him. And I have some copies if anybody really would like that. The book's out of print right now. You couldn't buy one if you wanted, but it's important that we tell his story. And what I learned real quickly, and having been trained in historical research, I quickly tried to learn as much as I could, what he had done, what he had accomplished. And frankly, I was floored. I was amazed at what this little guy in this third-floor apartment at Garnet Homes had accomplished in his early life. What I learned early on, or in the research, was that he played on the very first radio program in Nashville, WDAD, which preceded WSM by a few months. He played on there. He knew the manager of the store. He was there. He had to have his arm twisted to go down to WSM. He went to WSM. Actually, a night performer took him down there because he said, "You got to be on this station." He went down. Judge Hay was kind of reluctant to let him come on without an audition, but when he did, he couldn't believe it. He threw his old whistle up in the air, and anyway, he was there from then on for 15 years. He played on the Grand Ole Opry, on the Country Music Hall of the Country WSM station throughout that period. He was actually there the night that Judge Hay was inspired by his music to name the Opry the Opry. Prior to that, it was the Barn Dance. But after hearing D. Ford play a tune, or after hearing someone else try to play a trained song, and then D. Ford came up and he said, "D. Ford, you let it roll." And he played his train, his Pan American Express, or his Pan American Blues, on the station. And that supposedly is the start of what was officially the Grand Ole Opry. But he played every night until 1941, the most regular performer during that whole period. He also was in another first, and that's the first recording session that ever took place in Nashville, as was alluded to a few minutes ago. He was in that very first recording session. He was also in a session in Atlanta and in New York. But in the first recording session in Nashville, he was one of the first performers. So to me, all of those, and I could go on, but the thing that to me is even more remarkable is he did all this as a black man in the heyday of Jim Crow. And we're talking about a period where all the performers wanted him to travel with. They wanted him to go out on the road to draw their crowds. And I've got Roy Acuff on tape saying that he was an unknown when he came to the Opry. And he wanted D. Ford Bailey to take him out to go with him to draw in the crowds. But he went with Bill Monroe, he went with Roy Acuff, with the Delmore Brothers, Arthur Smith, Uncle Dave Macon was one of his favorites. But they traveled together all over the South and Midwest. But for him to do that, it wasn't easy. I mean, getting anything to eat, finding places to sleep, going to the bathroom. I mean, he had a tough time. But he bore through it with pride and dignity. And when he finally left the Opry in 1941, and I could spend a good bit of time covering that, but what I ended up learning from Kirk McGee was it was a licensing dispute between BM and ASCAP. But he left the Opry, and at that point, you know, they said, well, you will have a tough time making a living now. Well, he said he'd make it. And he did. He did not want to go on welfare. He did not want to live off the government in that period. And so he started shoe shining. He did barbecue stands. He even rented rooms. He'd rent this larger old house and then rent out some rooms in the apartment in the house. So he made a living. And then finally, when Urban Renewal tore down the shoe shine shop he had, he moved into the high-rise building where I'm in. And as I say, we hit it off. We really did. It's just one of those relationships that I'll always feel blessed to have had that friendship and that relationship. He called me his manager, but he frankly would not let me manage very much. He would tell me, he said, Mr. Morton, you're all right, but you don't know them like I do. So he was real wary of all sorts of things that could have made him considerable money. He did do a few things. I was able to get him to go back out to the Opry for the first Old Timer show. And that was set up basically to get D. Ford Bailey back on the Opry. It didn't just chance. I worked that out with the Opry staff, the WSM staff, to get him back out to the Opry. And then I got him to go back out on his birthday, his 75th birthday. So those two events I took him to. We did a number of other things, but he was always wary of being taken or whatever. You know, the daughters and I would try to get him to do things. Sometimes we were successful, sometimes we weren't, but we tried. In any event, after he died, he had asked me to do two things, by the way. One was to mark his grave. He did not want an unmarked grave. He wanted something to show permanently where he was buried. And he wanted me to tell his story. So the monument on his grave in Nashville, in Greenwood Cemetery, we put up a year after he died, 1983. And I had Bill Monroe, Roy Acuff, Herman Crook, and all sorts of people, the mayor of Nashville. They were all there to recognize D. Ford Bailey at that time. And there are even a couple of my friends who are sitting here in the back, Dave and Catherine, who came to that event back in 1983. And I'm so glad they can be here again today. But it just was one of those occasions. We made the Today Show. You can actually go online right now on YouTube and find there's a clip on one of the news stations about Kenley Jones, that's what it was, did a clip that talks about him being recognized and honored at that point. And there have been a number of things since then. The public radio, public television, we've done documentaries on him. We put two historical markers up in Tennessee, one not too far from here, and the other in Edgehill. Those are the more traditional historical markers that are up honoring him. The big thing, the thing that happened though just a year or so ago that I think has impressed a lot of people was Ken Burns' country music series. Had a good bit of coverage of D. Ford Bailey in there. And I worked with them to some extent on that as well, trying to get the photos and the music released. But anyway, I could go on. The thing is, what I have tried to do is to tell his story. He was an incredible person. There was no way I could be here today and not wear a coat and tie. He always dressed up. I mean, shoes shined. He always looked immaculate. When I would go over to his apartment, whether he knew I was coming or not, he always looked like he was ready to perform. I mean, he took care of his appearance. He wanted to look good, and again, just a special relationship and a special. I'm so glad you're doing this. It's really, really nice. Thank you for letting me say that.
That was a wonderful account of Mr. D. Ford Bailey. I want to introduce a lady now. We've been working on this COVID. Actually, this should have happened last year. And we've had the sign stored in the Chamber of Commerce for well over a year now. And so we're really happy that we've got to be able to do this today. So I'm going to introduce the state representative, Miss Ashley DeRossi.
So, thanks, Bill. It's definitely an honor to be in Smith County today. It's a pleasure when we get to go out into all the 95 counties in the state of Tennessee and talk about, we all call them artists and legends in Tennessee. As you know, music is huge in the state. And so it's great to go out and learn more about people like Mr. DeFord Bailey, and it's great to read the marker. If you've not got a chance to read the marker once we get it unveiled, make sure you do that, because you learn so much about incredible people. And what's interesting, then you learn they're from your hometown, and it makes it even more interesting. So it's definitely an honor to be in Smith County today, to honor and celebrate and recognize the gifted harmonica player, Mr. DeFord Bailey. And what a great tribute that David gave to him. And I just want to say, David was instrumental in getting us the copy and the images, and so it really wouldn't be possible without the work that he has put behind it. But also, as Bill mentioned, Bill has been great to come alongside us and partner with us to make this happen. The pandemic really proved challenges for our state, and those of you in local government know that we had a lot of challenges, and so it's great to be here. It's a year in the making. Bill probably thought we were just creating an ornament for the chamber, but I'm glad to see it installed and see it up. So thank you, Bill, for everything you've done, from me harassing him about paperwork to shipping to, is it okay? Is it there? Has it arrived? When are we going to put it up? Thank you for everything that you've done. It's greatly appreciated. Also, thank you to the Smith County Mayor Jeff Mason and the Carthage Mayor Sarah Smith. Your leadership is definitely instrumental in tourism and keeping that thriving, especially after the year that we've been through. So it's been difficult. It's not been easy. A lot of the local residents and your just average person traveling through the state don't see the ramifications, but we have had those, and so we're great to hopefully be coming out on the other side of that. This just wouldn't be possible. I do not see any members of the General Assembly here, but this program would not be possible without the General Assembly of the state of Tennessee. Our senators and House of Representative members recognize the importance of the musical heritage and gave us a budget a couple years ago to actually make these happen. And so the goal is to have a marker just like this one in all 95 counties. And we've got a slow start, but we're going to get there. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that program. But also, we have a large team in Nashville that work hard every day to make these markers happen. It takes a while. Me and Bill talked about getting it shipped and getting it unveiled and getting it installed is a process, but also working through the legal team and the design team. And so it's a long process, so we couldn't do it without them either. But I want to tell you, you heard about Mr. Bailey, so I won't cover anything on that, but I want to tell you a little bit about how this came about. So in 2018, our department launched the Tennessee Music Pathways. It was almost in conjunction with what you heard David talk about, the Ken Burns Music Pathway as well. So you can learn about Ken Burns' documentary that he did about music on our website. That was in conjunction with our department as well. And so this is they kind of were released at the same time. But basically it was launched to preserve, promote, and inspire Tennessee's rich, diverse musical heritage. And a lot of people think about music and they think about a couple places. They think about Nashville, they think about Memphis and the blues. But the fact is that 7 genres do call Tennessee home. blues, bluegrass, country, rock and roll, rockabilly, soul, gospel. We really have it all covered right here in our home state. And with the help of state historian and renowned author Colin Escott, many of y'all may know Colin, he helped identify the people and the places and the significant events that occurred right here. And that is the reason that we're here today honoring Mr. Bailey. And our goal with this program is to connect the fans to the music and inspire travel to destinations just like Smith County and Carthage, to keep that visitor in the area longer, to learn more about the artists, and to spend a little money in that community to drive the economy and keep tourism thriving in the community. But I'll end saying this before we unveil the marker, and I cannot wait for you to see it. You can learn more about the Tennessee Music Pathways at TennesseeMusicPathways.com. And just make sure when you go on there, like I said, we're in the early phases of this. COVID was a huge distractor for the program. Our department did not travel for 1 year, and so it's great to be back out on the road. But go on there and learn about the artists, because there's many artists that's just as talented as Mr. DeFord Bailey, that didn't want recognition but deserved all the recognition in the world, that showed up every day, and it's the reason that so many millions and billions of visitors visit Tennessee each year, and it makes it an awesome place to visit and work and live and play. And so we're very blessed in the state. So without further ado and not saying any more, if I could get David to come forward to the marker, Mayor Smith, Mayor Mason, and members of Mr. DeFord Bailey's family. If we could get you all to come to the marker, we'll get some things moved real quick, and we will get the marker unveiled. And then once we get a couple photos, you all are free to read the sign and take as many photos as you want. But we'll get this one photo underway. So what we try to do is make sure that we can get as many of the signs in different places. And so we have this sign, and I'm going to present this to Mayor Mason, and he's going to get it framed, and it'll be up here in Smith County for you guys to come back and look. Even if people can't get to the sign, they'll get the message of Mr. Bailey elsewhere in Smith County. So we're super excited about that. So, Mayor Mason.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This video has been brought to you by these fine sponsors: